No matter where you live, whether it's a town or in the country, chances are you don't live too far from a churchyard or a cemetery. Have you ever just wandered around and read some of the headstones and wondered what kind of life these people had, or wondered how they died? If you look closely, you may find one that has a curious epitaph written upon it, or a couple of words that may seem curious and hint to something intriguing. In this series, I'll be bringing you stories behind these headstones to reveal an interesting life or a tragic and sorrowful end. These are not celebrities as we know today. Some may have been recognised in their lifetime but have forgotten names now, or they may be normal folk whose lives were tragically cut short. Join me as I discover some tales from the grave. Today we visit the large cemetery here in Tipton. The grave marker we are visiting has 19 names on it. 19 young girls, all killed in an explosion and all aged between 13 and 16 years of age. It was a story that would probably have been played out countless times. A teenage daughter takes on an unsuitable job against the wishes of her parents, and a worried mother turns up at the workplace on her first morning to bring her daughter home. Only on this occasion, the story has a tragic ending. 4 months pregnant, expecting her third daughter, Florence Bryant was just about to walk out of the door of the L.K. Knowles Metalworks with 14-year-old daughter Gladys in tow, having persuaded her boss to relieve the youngster of her duties. But as the pair headed for the exit, a huge explosion tore through the building, blowing the roof off. Florence was thrown to the ground with huge force, leaving her with life-changing injuries. Gladys was not so lucky. As Florence spent the next few minutes groping around on the floor in a dazed state, frantically looking for her daughter, the reality was that Gladys was already on her way to Dudley Guest Hospital with horrific injuries that would prove fatal. The date was the 6th of March 1922, probably the darkest day in Tipton's history. The location, a factory on Groveland Road. The site now marked with a commemorative blue plaque. Florence was one of the few to survive the disaster. A total of 19 girls aged 13 to 16, all employed illegally by factory boss John Walter Knowles, died as a result of injuries sustained in the explosion. It was just 4 years after the First World War, and the nation was hardened to bloodshed. But even so, the scale of the disaster, and perhaps the fact that the victims were all young girls, shocked so many. Clive Wygram, equerry to King George V, wrote a letter of condolence on the King's behalf. For the Bryant family, it was something that was rarely spoken about. "I never knew a thing about it until I was 37, said Florence's grandson, John Bryant. By coincidence, John, who was a civil engineer, was working on a project in the same road as where the disaster happened. He will never forget the reaction of his father Ted, a hard-bitten veteran of the Second World War, when he discovered where he was working. "One day in 1986, my dad asked me what I was working on, and I said I was working in Groveland Road," he recalls. He said, "Can't you not work down there?" and told me the story. He was 71 and had never said anything about it before. He was upset, and I must admit that when I went to work the next day, it was on my mind too. It left a huge mark on the family living in West Street, Dudley at the time. Florence's unborn daughter survived the blast and was born in the summer of that year and given the name Elsie. But the blast had caused severe injuries to Florence's hands, leaving her unable to hold the baby. Florence's husband, Pharaoh, died some weeks after Gladys's funeral, aged just 39, and it fell to the eldest surviving daughter, Mary, herself only just aged about 11 or 12, to help bring up the baby. The blast took place at about 11:45 a.m. on March the 6th, 1922. Knowles, who lived 9 miles away in Staunton, had secured a lucrative contract breaking up surplus rifle cartridges left over from the First World War so they could be sold for scrap. The work had been subcontracted to Knowles from Birmingham-based Premium Aluminium Company, which had been carrying out such work for some time under licence from the Home Office. For a fee of £500 plus a half share of any profits made, Premium Aluminium handed Knowles 160 tonnes of cartridges, and it fell to Knowles' workforce to dismantle the cartridges, separating the copper casing from the lead bullets and removing any trace of gunpowder so that they could safely be melted down. But while Harry Andrews, chairman of Premium Aluminium, insisted his company only employed girls aged 18 or over and made sure the cartridges were broken underwater, Knowles was not quite so scrupulous. Andrews paid his adult workers between £2 and £3 a week, about £121 to £182 at today's prices. But Knowles paid his child labour force just 6 shillings, the equivalent of about £18 today. And while the girls at Premium Aluminium had felt pads on their shoes to reduce the risk of sparks and fireproof screens to separate them, Knowles did not bother with such matters. The gunpowder was going everywhere, says John. They were told to put it in a bucket and chuck it in the canal. There was a stove alight, my grandmother said, when she went into the factory. She thought it was a spark from that which lit the gunpowder. According to reports, the girls were said to have been singing as they worked a few moments before the blast, but when the Express and Stars reporter arrived, it was a scene of total carnage. Ebor Chadwick, the 31-year-old works manager, had briefly left the shop and returned to see a veritable inferno. To his credit, he did his best to save the girls. With great pluck, he and others dashed around the room, putting out the flames with bags and the like, and dragging from the burning building the prostrate or shrieking, panic-stricken girls, the paper reported. Some of these were scorched beyond recognition. The flying gunpowder had totally disfigured them, their clothing literally torn from their bodies. A total of 22 girls, plus Florence Bryant, were taken to Dudley Guest Hospital, mostly in passing cars or lorries that had been flagged down. Only 3 survived. The firm employed about 50 girls, and those who were not injured ran home. Some of the injured are quite unrecognisable, said the report. Not only are their features terribly deformed, but most of the girls have no hair left. All the injured, apart from Florence Bryant, were described as extremely ill. Gladys survived until about 7:30 the following evening. In her harrowing account of the incident, her sister Mary described the agony her older sister went through in the last hours. My dear sister was asking for a drink of cocoa, and my auntie said to the nurse, "Why don't you give it to her?" The nurse replied that if she did, that it would just run out of her back. Mrs. Bryant was rescued by Sam Morgan, who had been picking coal from a disused pit mound at the time of the disaster. I could see several girls inside, screaming, tearing away at the few garments that were still on them, and all on fire, he said. The last one to come out, as I thought, was a young woman. She had all her hair burnt away and nothing on, only her corsets and part of a garment worn underneath them and still burning in different places. Mr. Morgan described the last moments of Lizzie Williams, a 13-year-old girl he tried to rescue. Inside, I came across another little girl lying on the floor, not much bigger than a good-sized doll. She was moaning and muttering and was nude with only her tattered boots on. She again started muttering on the way to hospital, and I could see she hadn't got long to live, so I thought I would try to get her name from her. She didn't answer me the first time, so I asked her again, and she answered as well as she could. "Lizzie," she said. "What else?" "Williams, Lizzie Williams," and I believe that was the last time that the poor little girl spoke. Also among those who died was 14-year-old Annie Naylor, a relative of historian Billy Howe. His mother, who was Annie's cousin, recalled attending a funeral for 12 of the girls. She described the scene to me that day at Tipton Cemetery as she stood with other relatives and local dignitaries close to the vast array of floral tributes covering the grave, where a vault had been acquired for the purpose of a mass burial. As the mourners emerged through the cemetery gates, thousands had gathered to pay their respects. At Stafford Assizes, John Walter Knowles, 55, manufacturer, was found guilty of the manslaughter of Mabel Weaver, one of the victims of the Tipton workshop, on March the 6th. Mr Justice Shearman sentenced him to 5 years penal servitude. Ebert James Richard Chadwick, 31, works manager to Knowles, was found not guilty and was discharged. The girls were engaged in breaking down miniature rifle ammunition when the explosion occurred. After the verdict, Mr Justice Shearman was informed that 19 had died from their injuries and 3 were still in hospital. The police proved a previous conviction against Knowles of 18 months imprisonment for receiving stolen metal and several convictions for contraventions of the Factory Act. Mr Graham Millward, who defended Knowles, said that ammunition worth £2,800 had been seized by the authorities and there were 23 actions pending as a result of the explosion. In passing sentence, Mr Justice Shearman said this was one of the worst cases of manslaughter he had ever had to deal with. He was not taking into consideration any previous offences at all. Knowles saw an opportunity, as so many people did now, to make a big profit on a transaction. There was gross exploitation of the labour of little girls and boys. The sweepers were the little boys, in order to get more profit out of it. If he were to treat the case lightly, he should be wanting in his duty. However, according to Mary Bryant's account, her mother had written a letter calling for his sentence to be reduced. She always said when she was talking to him that morning, she found him a gentleman and understanding. A public appeal raised £4,766. 3 of the girls, all disfigured and disabled, were trained at college as commercial clerks. They each received 12 shillings per week and a £6 dress allowance. The invested funds provided the disabled girls, 5 in total, with a lifetime income of 17 shillings a week, or a lump sum of £133 on reaching the age of 21. The bereaved parents also received funds from the Dudley Port Explosion Fund, which raised over £10,000. Councillor and hinge manufacturer William Woolley Doughty, Justice of the Peace, and Chairman of Tipton Urban District Council, set up a relief fund on behalf of the town to pay for the funerals. The Knowles voluntarily paid £10,000 in compensation to the victims and their families. That's about £646,000 at today's prices. The 19 girls who sadly lost their lives were as follows. Elizabeth Aston, age 14, died later, no address given. Gladys May Bryant, age 14, of 15 West Street, Dudley Port. Margaret Maggie Burns, age 15, Sheepwash Lane, West Bromwich. Laura Dalloway, age 15, of 36 Upper Church Street, Tividale. Edith Drew, age 15, of number 1 house, 1 court, Boat Row, Tipton. Annie Eliza Florence Edwards, age 15, of 77 A Block, Munition Huts, Dudley. Lucy Edwards, age 14, died some weeks later, of 3 Sheepwash Street, Tipton. Elsie Follows, age 15, of 196 Dudley Port. Violet May Franklin, age 15, 17 Cleaton Street, Tipton. Annie Freeth, age 15, 42 Farley Street, Great Bridge. Lily Griffiths, age 15, of Railway Street, Horsley Heath. Hannah Hubbard, age 16, number 1 house, 5 court, Dudley Port. Ethel May Jukes, age 15, died sometime later, no address given. Nellie Kay, age 15, of 20 Great Bridge Street, West Bromwich. Priscilla Longmore, age 13, of 337 Dudley Port. Annie Naylor, age 14, of 162 Dudley Port. Edith Richards, age 14, 7 Factory Road, Tipton. Mabel Weaver, age 14, of 3 Victoria Terrace, Tipton. Elizabeth Lizzie Williams, aged 13, of Old Cross Street, Tipton. The 5 survivors listed on the memorial are Florence Bryant, Florence Masters, Mary Luca, Nellie Warmer and Gladys Williams.